Picture yourself in a quiet space where the only sound is a gentle, trembling voice calling out for reassurance. It's subtle yet persistent, and it yearns for acceptance in ways you might have rarely acknowledged. That voice could very well be your wounded inner child, the part of you that has long sought emotional safety, yet felt hidden behind adult responsibilities. Many people sense a vague emptiness or constant anxiety, not realizing it may stem from childhood trauma signs that were never addressed. There is power in recognizing that these early experiences can shape adult self-love, or the lack thereof. When you hear the phrase, "heal your inner child," it might sound like a vague notion. Yet there's real substance behind this concept. From a psychological standpoint, your unconscious mind holds memories of what you felt, feared, and believed as a small child. Over time, those emotional imprints can morph into self-sabotage patterns in adulthood. Maybe you wrestle with overcoming shame or find yourself repeating toxic relationship cycles without fully understanding why. That smaller, younger version of you is still present beneath the layers of grown-up logic, hoping for the sense of security that was missing back then. In many forms of analytical psychology, including Jungian psychology, there's emphasis on the process of emotional well-being through confronting hidden aspects of the psyche. Carl Jung introduced the concept of the shadow, a space in the psyche where we store the attributes or emotions we find too uncomfortable to face. Often, the wounded inner child resides in this realm. Yet, addressing this child isn't merely about rehashing old hurts. It's about forging a new connection with the part of you that once felt helpless or overlooked. This connection can lead you toward a path to wholeness, enabling you to develop self-compassion practice and create a sense of internal nurturing. Throughout this conversation, you'll see how childhood conditioning can set the stage for later experiences. We'll explore techniques from cognitive psychology, psychoanalysis, and even dark psychology insights to reveal how unmet childhood needs can fuel adult conflicts. You'll discover how reparenting techniques can fill in the emotional gaps left by the past. You'll also learn about emotional neglect, the unconscious mind, and the importance of mindful self-love in shifting your life's narrative. There is no requirement to be stuck in old patterns, especially once you recognize how your inner child may be guiding much of your behavior today. If you stay with me to the very end, you'll gain more than just ideas. You'll see practical steps and specific ways to begin your personal transformation. This isn't about masking childhood wounds or condemning the adults who raised you. It's about moving forward in a more empowered manner, one that respects your need for love, security, and psychological safety. With each section, we'll build on these insights, showing you that healing fear of abandonment or learning to break a toxic pattern is genuinely possible. So, set aside the rush of daily life for a moment and lean into that faint voice inside that's always been there. In the coming sections, you'll find tools to protect that vulnerable part of you and begin shaping a healthier, more compassionate relationship with yourself. Think of this as a chance to unearth hidden layers of emotional resilience and find renewed self-worth. Though it might feel uncomfortable at first, recognizing and embracing that younger, you can be the most nurturing form of personal empowerment you've ever tried. You're about to witness how acknowledging your inner child is often the initial step on the road to genuine self-love. Identifying early imprints. If you've ever wondered why certain social interactions leave you anxious, or why you occasionally feel a sharp fear of rejection, it might relate to childhood conditioning. Research in behavioral psychology highlights how repeated experiences, positive or negative, carve pathways in our minds. Renowned scholar Aristotle long ago reflected on how humans learn habits through repeated actions, suggesting that these early patterns can become second nature. When you're scolded for asking questions or seeking comfort as a child, the unconscious mind may store that moment as proof that your needs aren't valid. Years later, you might avoid speaking up in meetings or struggle to express your concerns in friendships. Developmental psychology adds another angle. Mary Ainsworth's famous strange situation experiment demonstrated how infants develop various attachment styles based on caregiver responsiveness. An avoidant style might emerge if a parent consistently overlooks a child's emotional signals, ultimately paving the way for an adult who struggles with emotional neglect issues. Conversely, an anxious attachment style could appear in someone who received inconsistent attention, leading to grown-up behaviors like overthinking text messages or worrying chronically about abandonment. This phenomenon is closely tied to the journey of inner child healing, as the patterns formed early on can echo in adult relationships. Meanwhile, psychoanalyst Karen Horney emphasized that confronting uncomfortable truths about our early years can be both transformative and challenging. She once wrote, "The search for truth is the most important work in the whole world, and the most dangerous. That search may involve revisiting past hurts that shaped your understanding of love, safety, and belonging. If you find this process unsettling, you're not alone." The path to wholeness isn't always smooth, but many have found it empowering once they begin to see how childhood beliefs can influence everything from self-sabotage patterns to career choices. In her lesser-known book, Our Inner Conflicts, Horney describes the defenses children adopt to cope with anxiety and how these defenses often remain hidden in adulthood. Imagine a young mind developing certain strategies, like avoiding eye contact, downplaying personal achievements, or chasing external approval, just to sidestep the pain of feeling ignored. Over time, these strategies can become second nature, quietly dictating emotional responses in social settings. This is where reparenting techniques can make a huge difference, allowing you to replace old behaviors with healthier emotional regulation strategies. As you begin to recognize these early imprints, don't forget that unlearning is a process. It might involve journaling prompts, guided mindfulness, or simply talking with someone who understands the significance of childhood trauma recovery. Telling yourself, "I'm allowed to feel what I feel," can be one small step toward greater emotional safety. Such affirmations, simple as they sound, can loosen the grip of old conditioning patterns and bring you closer to healing the wounded inner child you once were. Behavioral psychology shows us we can learn new habits at any stage of life. That means the imprint of early experiences, while powerful, doesn't have to rule your present. By recognizing that your adult life is still influenced by the child you were, you gain a chance to transform anxiety into resilience. Whether it's the memory of a harsh reprimand or the absence of comforting words, shining light on those origins is the first major step in rewriting your emotional script. When the inner child guides adult sabotage. It's fascinating to see how subconscious fears can drive us to act in ways that undercut our happiness. Dark psychology insights suggest that manipulative tactics, whether aimed at ourselves or others, often stem from old emotional wounds seeking protection. Confucius, an influential philosopher who spoke on moral development, once hinted that people are not inherently flawed but can become misguided by unchecked impulses. Imagine a child who grew up fearing rejection so intensely that, as an adult, they sabotage close relationships. On the surface, it looks self-defeating. Yet at a deeper level, it's the wounded psyche repair mechanism at work. If I disrupt the bond early, I won't have to face the pain of abandonment later. Psychoanalyst Melanie Klein believed that childhood fantasies mingle with reality in the child's mind. Her statement, "In the child's mind, fantasy and reality intermingle," points out that young individuals may not clearly differentiate between what's imagined and what's real. This blurred line can linger into adulthood if never examined. Think of someone who was constantly criticized as a child. That person might still hear that critical voice today, even if no one else is actually condemning them. The emotional reflex triggers from childhood can persistently shape adult decisions, including whether to trust others, chase certain life goals, or retreat into fear. John B. Watson's controversial Little Albert experiment in behavioral psychology demonstrated how easily conditioned fears can be created. Though the ethics of that study are questionable, it underscored a universal truth. If a fear is established early on, it may remain unless it's consciously undone. That's exactly what can happen when self-sabotage patterns emerge. A part of you, formed in childhood, tries to avoid perceived danger. You might ruin a promising opportunity because feeling safe in failure is more familiar than risking success. Or you cling to a toxic pattern, believing it's normal because it echoes old, ingrained beliefs. Lesser known but crucial to this discussion is Melanie Klein's work, The Psychoanalysis of Children. She shows how unprocessed anxiety in childhood can crystallize into long-term defense mechanisms. Picture someone who grew up in a chaotic environment. Without understanding it, they might develop intense control issues as an adult, needing every aspect of life to be predictable. In essence, the child who once felt powerless is still pulling the strings, aiming to dodge the old feeling of being out of control. Such behaviors can block true emotional healing if never explored. Recognizing the childlike fears guiding adult actions is the turning point in reducing self-sabotage. Once you see that an unhealed part of you is driving the bus, you can begin setting boundaries for healing. Whether it's speaking with a counselor, practicing mindful self-compassion, or simply becoming more aware of your triggers, each step forward helps tame those old fears. At times, you may need to remind yourself that you're no longer the small child who had limited power. You now have resources, emotional intelligence boost techniques, and more authority to shape your life. This process isn't about blaming caregivers or resenting the past. Rather, it's about offering yourself the grace to acknowledge that you did the best you could with what you knew. Now, you have fresh tools and knowledge that can break the cycle. By addressing the hidden influences from childhood, you open the door to more stable relationships, healthier self-esteem, and genuine self-love. Brain pathways and unconscious memories. Even when you try to rationalize a painful experience from the past, your body may react as if it's happening all over again. Neuroscience and cognitive neuroscience research shows that emotional memories don't merely reside in a mental file labeled past. Instead, they become interwoven with the autonomic nervous system. Lao Tzu, an ancient philosopher, once wrote about the power of subtle influences, noting that small streams eventually shape massive landscapes. Similarly, those early emotional experiences can carve neural pathways that define how you respond to stress and relationships in adulthood. Within the brain, structures like the hippocampus and amygdala help store and process memories of fear, security, and attachment. If you went through childhood emotional neglect, your brain might be wired to detect any hint of rejection, triggering anxious or avoidant behaviors. These reactions can feel automatic and overwhelming, as though an alarm system goes off in your mind before you even understand what's wrong. That's one reason the wounded inner child can appear suddenly in adult life, launching panic or resentment. You're reacting from a place embedded in your unconscious mind, shaped by events you may only vaguely remember. Donald Winnicott, a pediatrician and psychoanalyst, famously stated, "There is no such thing as a baby. There is only a baby and someone." This suggests that our earliest interactions, how we're held, spoken to, and comforted, imprint onto our developing sense of self. Without a nurturing relational environment, a child may grow up with chronic shame cycle tendencies, always feeling like they're lacking support. In adulthood, this can manifest as seeking external validation or clinging to individuals who promise security, even if those relationships are toxic. Modern studies in neuroplasticity show that healing fear of abandonment and other attachment-related injuries is possible. With consistent mental exercises, therapy, or mindfulness practices, you can literally rewire your brain's responses. Think of it as forging new emotional safety tips for yourself. Reparenting techniques, in particular, encourage visualizing comforting experiences you never had. Over time, these new mental patterns can strengthen neural circuits that support self-compassion practice. It might feel awkward at first, but the repetition can help shift automatic responses from panic to calm. A lesser-known but influential work by Winnicott is Playing and Reality. In this text, he discusses the concept of transitional objects and how imaginative play fosters resilience in children. Even as adults, harnessing creativity, be it through art, journaling, or fun projects, can open a space where you reconnect with a sense of wonder and safety. Sometimes, re-engaging with the playful side of life is more healing than people realize. Activities that make you laugh or spark curiosity can remind that anxious, wounded inner child that joy still exists. This mind-body integration is a powerful pathway to emotional resilience. When you experience old triggers, you can pause and remind yourself, "I'm not in that old environment anymore." Slowly, the brain learns to quiet the emergency responses that once felt automatic. It's a gradual process that requires patience, but over time you'll notice shifts. You might feel less need to assume the worst, lash out, or withdraw from closeness. By honoring both your neurobiology and your emotional experiences, you nurture a space within where your inner child feels genuinely seen and protected. The consequence of emotional neglect. Have you ever found yourself suppressing your own needs because it felt too risky to voice them? That behavior can often be traced back to childhood. Sigmund Freud argued that unresolved early conflicts echo in adult life, sometimes emerging as anxiety, mood swings, or even physical symptoms. In a different vein, Jean Piaget pointed out that children actively construct meaning from their surroundings. If a child receives little emotional support, they might come to believe their feelings don't matter, effectively internalizing that neglect. Later, such beliefs can feed a toxic relationship cycle or make a person chronically doubt their worth. Erich Fromm remarked, "Not he who has much is rich, but he who gives much," highlighting the importance of generosity of spirit. When thinking about reparenting techniques, it's crucial to remember that you need to extend generosity to yourself as well. Giving validation, reassurance, and praise to your wounded inner child can feel strange at first, but it's a key piece in childhood trauma recovery. This process can help reverse the chronic shame cycle that might have set in if you grew up with little acknowledgement or too many expectations. One broad study that underscores these points is the Adverse Childhood Experiences (ACE) study, which found strong correlations between emotional neglect and long-term psychological and physical health issues. When basic emotional needs go unmet, it sets a fragile foundation for adulthood. It becomes easier to slip into self-sabotage patterns, or to settle for relationships where mistreatment feels oddly familiar. Many who struggle with boundary setting as adults trace these difficulties back to never having learned how to set or respect boundaries in childhood. Alice Miller's lesser-known but vital work, The Drama of the Gifted Child, highlights how children who appear mature for their age might be silently carrying the weight of unmet emotional needs. A child might excel in school, sports, or pleasing adults, yet feel an internal emptiness. Over time, that emptiness can evolve into anxiety trigger management issues, depression, or a series of confusing behaviors where the adult can't figure out why they're constantly running on empty. Miller emphasizes that truly caring adults must look beyond a child's achievements to see their deeper emotional realities. Avicenna, an early scholar often regarded for his contributions to medicine and philosophy, believed in the interconnectedness of mind, body, and soul. Even hundreds of years ago, thinkers like him suspected that emotional well-being has profound physical and mental consequences. Modern psychology continues to validate that perspective. When emotional neglect is present, the individual's entire system, heart rate, stress hormones, and even immune responses, can be thrown off balance. Healing involves recognizing that your wounded inner child deserves better than the silence or indifference you once experienced. So if you notice that your sense of self-worth dips drastically when faced with criticism, or you find it almost unbearable to ask for help, pause and consider what early environment shaped those beliefs. Was your voice continually ignored, or were you encouraged to hide your emotions? Acknowledging these roots isn't about dwelling on the past, but about forging a new sense of self-worth restoration. By validating your own needs, you're effectively telling that younger version of you that they matter and always have. This gentler approach can drastically change the ways you interact with people, approach challenges, and care for yourself in day-to-day life. Confronting the shadow through Jungian perspectives. Carl Jung proposed that each person has a shadow, an internal repository of traits and emotions we'd rather not recognize in ourselves. That shadow can hold frustration, jealousy, or even the neglected aspects of the inner child. Epictetus, a Stoic philosopher, once said, "We cannot choose our external circumstances, but we can always choose how we respond to them." This notion is especially relevant for the adult who feels haunted by childhood vulnerabilities recognized long ago but never addressed. When those vulnerabilities go unhealed, they can warp into dark psychology boundaries or manipulative tactics aimed at self-preservation. In Jung's framework, real self-love emerges when you integrate the parts of yourself that were previously hidden. The wounded inner child often resides in that concealed space. Confronting this aspect isn't a sign of weakness, it's a testament to emotional resilience building. Jung once observed, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." That darkness may be old memories of rejection, unspoken anger, or shame that has lingered for years. Bringing it to light can free you from repeating harmful patterns, whether in relationships or internal dialogues. Stanislav Grof, though working more in transpersonal psychology, wrote a lesser-known gem called The Adventure of Self-Discovery. In it, he explores methods like holotropic breathwork to access deep layers of the psyche. These practices can tap into memories, sensations, or images that your everyday consciousness tends to ignore. For someone aiming to heal your inner child, such methods can reveal how potent those early experiences truly were, and how they might still be influencing your behavior. The idea isn't to become overwhelmed by painful recollections, but to gently acknowledge them and take steps toward compassion-based therapy approaches. Some people fear that opening these old emotional boxes will lead to feeling worse. However, many discover that acknowledging repressed feelings, exploration actually lifts an invisible weight. Consider how a secret can gnaw at you. Once it's out, the tension often subsides. Similarly, when you give voice to your wounded inner child, you step into your power to change the narrative. If you keep quiet, those unhealed parts may surface in unintended ways, such as lashing out at loved ones or continually sabotaging personal goals. From a developmental trauma therapy angle, you might pair introspective methods with more structured approaches like cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT. This combination can offer both emotional catharsis and practical steps for day-to-day life. For instance, you could use CBT techniques to reframe negative thoughts. "I'm unlovable" becomes "my feelings matter," and I can learn new ways to connect. Meanwhile, reflective sessions inspired by Jung's shadow work allow you to confront deeper emotional layers without self-condemnation. Remember, confronting the shadow is not about judging your past self. It's about providing the understanding and psychological safety that your younger self never received. When you begin to heal those pockets of pain, you may find that you're freer to express joy, creativity, and genuine love. You're also more likely to build healthier relationships with others, as you're no longer operating from a place of hidden desperation. The path forward lies in gently unveiling what's been buried, extending compassion to that neglected child within and offering them the care they once lacked. Reparenting strategies and defense mechanisms. Imagine a moment when you feel unworthy of praise or suspicious of anyone offering kindness. Often, these reflexes trace back to the defense mechanisms Sigmund Freud described, like denial, projection, and repression, that might have rooted themselves in your psyche during childhood. If your inner child rarely heard, "I'm proud of you," then hearing such praise in adulthood might trigger disbelief or suspicion. Hippocrates, the ancient Greek physician, spoke of balancing human temperaments to achieve overall health. Emotional balance operates similarly. When unrecognized defense mechanisms run the show, your mind struggles to maintain a stable sense of self-worth. Carl Rogers, a pioneer in humanistic psychology, once noted, "The curious paradox is that when I accept myself just as I am, then I can change." This statement captures the essence of reparenting techniques. Instead of using shame or self-criticism to force a behavioral shift, you learn to offer unconditional positive regard to the wounded inner child. It's counterintuitive for many because they assume self-acceptance means complacency. In reality, self-acceptance can spark growth. By telling your inner child, "It's okay to feel afraid or uncertain," you lessen the power of subconscious negative scripts that often keep you stuck. A key modern approach is building emotional intelligence. If you notice a sudden surge of defensiveness or anger, that's an invitation to identify whether an older part of you is feeling threatened. Are you replaying the fear of abandonment from childhood or the worry of not being enough? By naming these emotions, that's anxiety, that's shame, that's frustration, you prevent them from hijacking your actions. This is a fundamental shift in your personal transformation guide. You move from blindly reacting to consciously responding, an approach that fosters emotional healing. Reparenting therapy often includes creative exercises like visualization or written dialogue with your younger self. A powerful method is to sit in a quiet space, close your eyes, and picture yourself as a child in a moment of distress. Now, instead of leaving that child alone with their tears, you arrive as your competent adult self. You comfort the child and assure them they're valued. This might feel awkward, but such a technique can help fill emotional gaps left by actual caregivers. Over time, you'll notice a reduction in self-sabotage patterns as your mind integrates new, supportive narratives. Lesser known but highly practical is Robert A. Johnson's inner work. Though it focuses primarily on dream analysis and active imagination, many find that these tools also apply to reparenting. By journaling dreams or recurring images, you get clues about your hidden needs and feelings. Then, through a process of gentle inquiry, you nurture understanding for that younger part of yourself. Sometimes, a dream about being lost or chased can reflect a sense of unresolved fear. When recognized, you can reframe it as, "A part of me feels scared, and I can offer it the compassion it never had." When you replace harmful coping methods with new emotional regulation strategies, you break the cycle that kept you in repetitive behavioral loops. The real gift of reparenting is giving yourself what you once lacked: emotional safety, approval, and a healthy environment to grow. Bit by bit, defense mechanisms recede and genuine self-worth emerges. Instead of feeling powerless in the face of old triggers, you begin to guide your life with clarity and hope, allowing your inner child to trust in the present moment rather than bracing for hidden threats. Societal mirrors and group influence. Picture a group setting where you feel compelled to remain silent, even though you have something important to say. Often this pressure arises from social psychology dynamics, a field famously explored by scholars like Philip Zimbardo and Solomon Asch. Baruch Spinoza, a rationalist philosopher, argued centuries ago that understanding the forces guiding human behavior is the first step to personal freedom. Society can act like a mirror that either reflects your value back to you or magnifies your insecurities. If your wounded inner child fears judgment, it might prioritize blending into the crowd over expressing genuine thoughts. Zimbardo's Stanford prison experiment and Ash's conformity studies highlight how susceptible we are to group influence. For someone struggling with reparenting techniques, these social mirrors can feel both validating and terrifying. If you were raised with criticism or neglect, a group's praise might feel exhilarating, yet you might also fear losing that approval. Conversely, negative feedback can cut to the bone, echoing old beliefs about unworthiness. This is where emotional resilience becomes essential, learning to navigate group dynamics without allowing them to dictate your self-worth. Søren Kierkegaard once remarked, "Once you label me, you negate me." When society or a peer group labels you, your wounded inner child might withdraw or rebel, anxious about being shoehorned into a role. The risk is that you start to see yourself exclusively through that label, forgetting your complexity and capacity for individual growth. This can lead to identity reconstruction issues, where you constantly mold yourself to fit social expectations rather than forming a stable sense of self grounded in who you truly are. In group settings, it's also easy to slip into people-pleasing behaviors, hoping to avoid the sting of rejection you once felt in childhood. You might overcommit at work, say yes when you mean no, or adopt opinions just to align with the collective. While short-term acceptance feels comforting, it can cultivate resentment over time. That younger you is essentially craving a sense of belonging, but the adult you might be ignoring personal boundaries empowerment. Eventually, this mismatch can result in burnout or emotional overload, reinforcing old wounds. Otto Rank, once a close associate of Freud, delved into the role of society in shaping the soul's growth in his lesser-known work, Psychology and the Soul. Rank pointed out that the pressures and norms of a community can either nurture or stifle an individual's psychological development. If your environment dismisses vulnerability, you might hide your inner child's needs. If it encourages openness, you might feel safer to share. Recognizing this interplay helps you see that your efforts at healing don't exist in a vacuum. They occur within a social context filled with real people and real judgments. Ultimately, the trick is to remain aware of how groups influence your sense of self. If you find yourself consistently bending to fit external expectations, ask whether you're bypassing the desires of your inner child. A balanced approach involves setting boundaries, practicing mindful self-love, and engaging with communities that respect your individuality. Over time, you'll learn how to take feedback without letting it define your worth. The child in you who once felt invisible or unwanted can gain a seat at the table as you navigate group dynamics with more confidence and authenticity. Transforming trauma and emotional release. Consider how certain life events can prompt powerful emotional responses long after they've passed. Trauma psychology offers insights into why some memories seem lodged in our minds, influencing day-to-day mood, choices, and relationships. Gautama Buddha once noted that pain is part of life, but our reactions to pain can intensify or lessen it. When old hurts resurface, it's your wounded inner child beckoning you to pay attention. The experiences may not be criminal-level traumas, but even smaller wounds can sting for decades if never acknowledged. In forensic psychology, experts sometimes explore how extreme childhood trauma might shape destructive behaviors in adulthood. Yet most people don't head down a criminal path. Instead, they might face toxic patterns in relationships, repeated self-sabotage, or unrelenting anxiety. Clarissa Pinkola Estes, in Women Who Run with the Wolves, poses the question, what must I give more death to today in order to generate more life? If certain coping habits stem from your younger self's fear, perhaps it's time to release those mechanisms so something new can grow. Post-traumatic growth, PTG, studies show that it's possible for individuals to emerge stronger, more empathetic, and more self-aware after going through substantial adversity. This doesn't trivialize the pain of emotional neglect or early attachment disruptions. Instead, it highlights a human capacity to transform suffering into a springboard for personal empowerment. Sometimes, healing fear loop tendencies is less about erasing painful memories and more about repurposing them into lessons of compassion for yourself and others. A lesser-known yet influential book by Estes, Women Who Run with the Wolves, weaves mythic stories that point to archetypal wounds many face, regardless of gender. Through fables and real-life anecdotes, she illustrates how suppressed emotions can fuel an ongoing sense of emptiness. In these stories, releasing old narratives often involves some form of emotional expression, whether through talking, crying, or creative outlets. The act of expression signals to your inner child that it's finally safe to feel, a game changer for emotional healing and for discovering your authentic self. Emotional release can take various forms: cathartic crying, journaling, movement therapy, or even breathwork sessions. The essence remains the same. You allow hidden pain to surface in a controlled way. Once the feeling is acknowledged, it often loses some of its sting. From a psychological self-care routines perspective, consistently making room for emotional expression can counteract years of bottled-up stress. It's akin to clearing clutter from a house. Once the space is free, you can see how to reorganize and make it feel like home again. While it may sound daunting, consider the relief that comes from letting go of old burdens. The child within you has been waiting for someone to say, "Your feelings make sense. It's okay to release them." By doing so, you're not invalidating your adult self. You're integrating a piece of your history that craves resolution. As you become more attuned to this transformation, you might find that triggers once carrying overwhelming fear now hold lessons in resilience. That's the power of turning trauma into a catalyst for deeper self-awareness and growth. Practical exercises and mind-body integration. Tackling the wounds of your younger self often requires tangible methods rather than abstract ideals. Enter cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, and mindfulness, two approaches proven to help you address and reshape negative core belief shift patterns. William James, often called the father of American psychology, emphasized the significance of habit formation. By disrupting old automatic responses and practicing new ways of thinking, you effectively train your mind to respond to triggers with more balance and emotional safety. CBT offers a structured way to challenge the messages rooted in childhood conditioning. For instance, if your inner voice says, "I'm unlovable," CBT prompts you to look for evidence to the contrary. Over time, consistently refuting this internal narrative teaches your brain a new tune, gently guiding you away from low self-esteem help cycles. Mindfulness complements CBT by training you to observe thoughts without judgment. Jon Kabat-Zinn, known for pioneering mindfulness-based stress reduction, MBSR, famously said, "You can't stop the waves, but you can learn to surf." In other words, you can't erase every emotional flashback or triggered response, but you can learn not to be swallowed by them. Kristin Neff's research on mindful self-compassion goes hand in hand with reparenting guided meditation. Through simple practices, like placing a hand over your heart and repeating affirmations of understanding, you foster an environment of emotional resilience building. Each time you respond to inner turmoil with compassion rather than criticism, you break a tiny piece of the old chain that held your wounded child in place. This approach also helps diffuse hostility or frustration that might arise when you feel you're not healing fast enough. Healing is rarely linear, but every gentle step counts. Marion Woodman, a Jungian analyst, explored how perfectionism can become an addiction in her lesser-known work, Addiction to Perfection. She argued that striving for flawlessness can stem from childhood experiences where love felt conditional on performance. If you sense an insatiable urge to be the best at everything, Pause and ask whether that drive was birthed in your younger self's longing for acceptance. Recognizing that route can free you to aim for excellence without sacrificing your well-being. The goal isn't to kill ambition, but to prevent it from becoming a coping mechanism that masks your real emotions. Beyond mental exercises, mind-body practices can help integrate emotional wisdom. Yoga, Tai Chi, or simple breathwork can shift you from fight or flight mode to a calmer state. These routines not only reduce stress hormones, but also remind your inner child that the body can be a safe haven rather than a vault of tension. Integrating these physical practices with psychological ones creates a holistic mental health approach that works on multiple levels. As you build new habits, watch for small wins. Maybe you paused before snapping at a friend, or you showed yourself kindness when old guilt bubbled up. These steps, although minor in the moment, accumulate into a robust framework for emotional safety and well-being. The aim isn't to become someone else. It's to become more of who you truly are, unburdened by outgrown fears. In each breath and each mindful moment, you're telling your wounded inner child, "I'm here, I'm listening, we're safe now." Embracing a new narrative. When you decide to rewrite how you see yourself, you're engaging in a process that Rollo May believed was central to human existence. Confronting your own vulnerability. It's an uncomfortable place, acknowledging the raw spots in your psyche. Yet, in that discomfort, lies the chance for genuine personal transformation. Viktor Frankl once said, "Between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space lies our power to choose." This power to choose is precisely what allows you to reconstruct your identity in ways that honor both your adult self and the voice of your wounded inner child. Reauthoring your personal story in therapy can shift long-held beliefs about what you deserve. Dan McAdams, known for narrative psychology, found that when individuals change the plots of their life stories, seeing themselves as survivors rather than victims, or as capable rather than hopeless, they genuinely experience improvements in well-being. This doesn't dismiss your history. Instead, it reframes it. That's the essence of identity formation tips. You accept that the past shaped you without allowing it to define your future. In the realm of Jungian psychology, reclaiming the gold lost in childhood is often described as an integral part of self-discovery. Robert A. Johnson's lesser-known book, Inner Gold, expands on this concept. Johnson posits that each person has an inherent value, or gold, that can be projected onto others, teachers, mentors, or romantic partners, when we fail to see it in ourselves. Drawing this gold back means recognizing your innate worth and not basing your entire sense of self on external approval. It's an active decision to see yourself as valuable even when no one else is cheering. John Locke, an Enlightenment thinker, believed that we start life with a mind like a blank slate, shaped over time by experiences. Reauthoring your narrative acknowledges that while you can't change the earliest words written on that slate, you can continue to write new chapters that validate your emotional well-being. As you adopt healthier coping mechanisms, you also teach your wounded inner child that it's possible to live with fewer limitations. That child, once so eager for love, becomes part of a present self that is learning to provide that love from within. Realize, too, that rewriting your internal script often means stepping back from relationships or environments that reinforce old stories of insufficiency. Some people might resist your growth because they've grown comfortable with your past identity. But as you trust yourself more, you'll sense that letting go of toxic influences is part of nurturing your healing fear of abandonment. You can explain your journey to loved ones, but you can't make them embrace it. The important part is that you honor your new path. When the old tape of self-criticism starts playing, pause and question it. Does this narrative truly reflect who I am now? If the answer is no, then gently replace it. Instead of, "I can't manage change," try, "I'm learning new ways to handle challenges." Instead of, I'm doomed by my past, say, my past is part of me, but I have authority over my present. By consciously weaving these affirmations into daily life, you solidify your evolving identity. Over time, your body, mind, and emotions learn this new language of self-compassion and empowerment, transforming it into your default mode of being. The power of wholeness. Here you are, having journeyed through a wide range of insights, from recognizing the significance of early conditioning to exploring methods for reparenting, emotional release, and mind-body integration. Aristotle once taught that the pursuit of knowledge must serve the betterment of life. In the same spirit, everything you've uncovered serves a practical purpose, to help you honor the younger you that once felt invisible or misunderstood. Recognizing your wounded inner child isn't about lingering in the past. It's about weaving that child's needs into your everyday awareness, offering support where there was once a void. Think of all the small moments in life: waking up in the morning, sharing a meal, navigating a conflict at work. Each moment holds the potential to solidify or weaken your connection to self-worth. When you incorporate reparenting techniques, you tell yourself a new story: I am worthy of care. Through emotional resilience exercises, you learn to interpret challenges not as evidence of personal failure, but as proof of your ability to adapt. Even if the world seems overwhelming, you have the tools to provide psychological safety to that tender part of your mind. Carl Jung's self-love isn't a slogan. It's an ongoing practice of integrating the shadow, acknowledging the child within, and understanding that you're a whole person, flaws and all. If you offer a quiet reassurance, I see you, I hear you, and I'm here, you communicate directly to the parts of you that once felt abandoned. Over time, this kindness reshapes your inner dialogues, enabling you to make choices that reflect genuine self-respect rather than a desperate need for external approval. None of this means you'll never feel triggered or uncertain again. Healing is more like a spiral than a straight line. Still, each loop around that spiral brings new awareness. You begin to spot the negative patterns faster and apply strategies more effectively. Self-compassion practice becomes a habit rather than an exception, and you feel less compelled to hide vulnerabilities that used to embarrass you. Overcoming shame in this manner grants a profound sense of personal empowerment, one that can ripple out into healthier relationships and fulfilling endeavors. For those with a history of toxic pattern interruption or a persistent fear of abandonment, this approach is especially life-changing. By integrating the emotional lessons you've learned, you aren't just fixing behaviors. You're tending to a foundational aspect of yourself. That's what makes this work transformative rather than merely remedial. It's not a short-term patch. It's a genuine recalibration of how you treat yourself at the most basic level. So as you step back into your daily routines, remember that wholeness doesn't arrive in a sudden moment of revelation. It blossoms gradually in every instance where you choose to protect that vulnerable inner voice instead of silencing it. By offering boundaries for healing, maintaining mindful self-love, and embracing the lessons of your personal story, you create a new environment within, a sanctuary that fosters ongoing growth and peace. Feel free to share your experiences or questions as you explore these concepts. Each personal story enriches the collective understanding of how we can heal our inner child and discover that self-love is more than an idea. It's a daily commitment to ourselves and everyone we hope to connect with. You have the capacity to stand up for the child you once were, and in doing so, you stand up for the adult you are today. This is the power of recognizing that you are more than the sum of your past experiences. You're an evolving individual capable of offering at last the compassion and validation that every child deserves.